Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney, and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. I'm hoping the guests' curiosities, inquiries, musings, and experiences will prompt your own inquiry into what this question means to you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 78th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to be joined by Simon van der Els. In his own words, Simon is a student of the invisible realm. He holds a PhD in the empirical tradition of molecular biology and also explores the subjective realm of shamanism as a way of rediscovering the interiority of the living cosmos. He enjoys time in nature, dance, and other embodied sensory experiences. While dialogue is one of the practices in which he can encounter a flow state, and it's one of his favourite activities. In this glorious conversation, Simon shares with us his explorations of experiencing a greater sense of being in life. He highlights the importance of connection to ourselves, to each other, and to the biosphere, in terms of feeling a deeper sense of belonging and being in this world that go beyond temporary states of flow or chasing peak experiences. We also touch on the grief that it is necessary for us to navigate in order to feel the depths of love and joy that are freely available to us. And that much of the way is more about remembering and resting than turning life into checklists for being and productivity. If you're struggling to feel a greater sense of being and alignment in your life, or if your explorations into being have yielded more processes and things to do in order to be, this conversation will point to fundamental aspects of being that could greatly shift your present perspectives and experience of life. Look, I really enjoyed this conversation with Simon. I find him to be extremely insightful and someone who is earnestly exploring the inner and invisible realms of life. So I suspect you're going to take a lot from this conversation yourself. And if you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please continue to leave your lovely reviews, as I greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. Please check out the show notes below for ways of contacting Simon or following his work, and also for following this podcast newsletter, What is a Good Life, in order to hear my reflections for what these conversations that you're listening to evoked in me. So that's all I have to say before this week's episode. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. But for now, the 78th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Simon, thank you very much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. After speaking with you the first time, I've been very much looking forward to this conversation and seeing wherever the hell it goes. So thank you for joining me today.
Very happy to be here, Mark. That's nice. Fully likewise.
Wonderful. So the question that I kick this off with is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Yeah, so you preempted that question already, and I already sense my mind starts scrambling to find out, like, okay, what am I trying to answer? Uh, I think the main thing is that I'm trying to learn not to seek answers anymore. I think because an answer feels super definitive, and the more and more I'm becoming aware of, I think, life. Yeah, I can call it that. The more and more I'm becoming aware that this whole thing is a process, and to seek stable, static things in a process is that's delusion. And so, if I'm seeking an answer, I would say it's more down to ways of being, how to be in a moving, unfolding cosmos process, and also myself as being an unfolding, moving process. Everything is. So if anything is keeping me busy, it's really seeking a way of being. And okay, I can also pinpoint that or condense that a bit more. It's seeking a way of being in the time between worlds, where clearly the way that we've been living as a species, as a global species, and specifically the global north, can add as many nuances as you'd like, is it's killing the planet, or it's killing the biosphere. And by now that seems obvious. But it's a remnant of an old way of being, a way of being that I've inherited through genetics, through education, through enculturation or domestication. And that way is not adaptive. It's not adaptive to the world as we knew it. So it wasn't adaptive the last century, but it worked within the confines of that system and within the freely available energy that there was, like with oil, etc., etc. So now we're heading off to this world which is in rapid change. Climate change is just accelerating; it's not lessening. Biodiversity loss is increasing. It's also not gradually tapering off. Ocean acidification, so all these societal unrest, upheaval, you could call it the meta crisis. All these things are getting, let's say, worse, or they're getting more to the foreground, so they're becoming more visible. And so there's this I would call it planetary shift happening, where we're going to a new potential equilibrium. But if you're moving from one stable state to the other stable state, it takes a while for it to find homeostasis, so to find a stable point to oscillate around. So any big perturbation one hand or to one side of the stable point will also have a massive movement back the other end. So it will we're heading in a or we are in an increasing time of chaos, and I'm just looking for ways of being with the chaos while at the same time operating or orienting myself to see what could be that other stable state, or what could be a safe home to land in, to grow, and not a home that you have to constantly leave behind. So, yeah, being in process, being in travel, and constantly being surprised at how deep this goes. So, uncovering my own biases, uh, heritage, ways of seeing, ways of doing, which actually aren't real or don't do reality any justice, or the non-human world or the cosmos. So it's a constant process of unlearning, yeah, and figuring that out. I think that's the main thing that I'm interested in.
What does this new home look like?
It is, if one thing, it's a place of profound connection and a place of profound felt connection to everything. So I would say it's a space where we operate, because normally we operate from this sense of I'm this enclosed body, this suit, and this is me, and me as a singular thing. Well, actually, this whole thing is already a multitude. And I'm picturing that the more we become aware of being a multitude, we start to become aware that we are part of a multitude. And what I feel or sense that home looks like, that new home, is one where we become aware that we are the planet, that we are a multitude of species, that we are a biosphere, at the same time while being aware that we are also this thing. And so it will be a place, or if we reach it, I don't know. I picture it as a place where we live with that presence and that confidence as well that comes from it, and that groundedness and that sense of being held. We live with that. So it's part of our daily life, except, and not part of three peak or four peak experiences that we have in our lifetime. It's a thing that we can tap into, that we know that is real.
Can you elaborate kind of on the significance of the discernment between peak experiences and something that seems to be a consistent companion or something that accompanies us?
Yeah. So the image I'm getting as you ask that question, because I'm also hearing myself say things, and then I'm having to think like, okay, what do I mean with this? Um, um, so my the peak experiences I've had, or I've had the joy of experiencing in my current life, many had to do with nature. So being out in nature and then just being struck all of a sudden by a sense of awe, connection to nature, cosmos. Often with mountains. I really love mountains. And I'm living in the Netherlands, which is the flattest place probably on the planet. So they're
Excellent choice. Yeah.
exactly. Um, and another thing is with plant medicine, so with psychoactive substances, so you can also call them psychedelics. And what I sense more and more that happens with psychedelics is that the doorways doorways of to perception that Aldous Huxley talked about. It's like an aperture of a camera, and with all these different senses in our body. So the main senses that we comfortably employ in daily life. Yes, sight, smell, taste, touch, hearing, these things. But at the same time, you also have deeper senses. So senses of I would call it via the heart, for instance, so sort of more extrasensory perception. And what happens during these psychedelic experiences, or these stages of unity, or these peak experiences, is that the aperture opens, so it becomes more open. And well, if you've experienced something like this, you're not, let's say, you're not functional if you would be constantly high.
Right.
If you're constantly in that peak experience that is induced by these compounds or in breath work, that's not a viable situation. Let's say you cannot gather food and all these kind of things.
An interesting experiment, maybe an experiment to run, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. um, but what I'm thinking is okay, this aperture increases, and the moment that this opens up, we have this heightened sense of perception, and we become aware of more and more percepts. We become aware that we are part of a larger body. Let's say we become recontextualized in a larger field of perception. So often we get like these big. I would get like insights that feel very obvious, but you get them embodied. So you have an embodied sense of like, oh, what does it actually feel like to be uh, this heath, or to be this mountain, or to connect deeply to a tree and feel your body being one with the tree and the tree being one with you. These kind of things. What I think that a sustained sense of heightened perception might look like is that the aperture after this doesn't fully close again, where we feel like we are this disconnected entity, this more egocentric entity, but that the aperture by default is more open. And again, when I'm thinking about that, mm, I'm not sure how functional it is for me either in this current way the civilization is to have my apertures constantly more open, because
Hmm.
it is difficult to be more open or to try to connect more deeply, because there's also a lot of, I think there are a lot of incentives within this current system to close down, to live as an individual, purely because it's yeah um, it can be maddening, let's say, to be connected to a lot of things and then see what the state of things are.
When you mentioned earlier just the sense of how to be, and just really curious to get your sense of, and I know words will often fail in terms of defining a sense of being, but what are you pointing to with that curiosity or that exploration, or what have you been experiencing as this question has emerged more clearly without it being a direct question as such?
Mm. Um, yeah, so on the one hand, I can think about experiencing, for instance, flow state, where you become less and less aware of. being anything. You're just or it's just flowing. So there's complete absorption with the moment, and through that there's hardly any friction happening. We also have states where we have hardly any friction happening, but it's like the opposite flow state. It's like being stuck to a telephone screen or something like that. It's like a I don't know, like a mock version of that. Um, but I wouldn't say no. I wouldn't say that I experienced that necessarily a lot. It's something that I take a lot of joy in when it happens, but it's not a thing that I can engineer. I think, or I haven't been able to engineer the conditions in which this happens. Conversation is one where it might uh, happen or occur. I think if I'm pointing towards a state of being which I feel this yearning, I think, towards, or this is maybe even a sense of lack. So maybe it's a remembering. It's a remembering of a way of being, how the human can be uh, in connection to its environment, and how I can be in connection to the environment. And I've experienced this mostly in places where I've been in nature, for instance, for a couple of weeks, in remote areas that you don't see that many people, um, and don't have a lot of, well, I would say distractions of like digital kind. And it's the way of being. Yeah, it's that felt sense of being part of a larger body. That's, I think, the main thing that
Yeah.
I feel. And for me, that's a very grounding and, yeah, loving position to be in. It makes one feel way less alone. And I think, well, if I suffer from, if I, well, heavy word, yeah, if I suffer from something or anything, it's often loneliness. And yeah, these kind of felt connections from the inside out, that you feel like you're, oh, this is way bigger than just me. Um, yeah, that feels like a homecoming, and that feels also that it makes sense way more than often the sort of individualized world can feel.
I think there's beautiful things you're pointing to here, even in describing, the almost a discombobulation of the world at the moment as it moves to another point, and not seeking a fixed point, but seeking a new home, and that home is still something where there's movement, where things are emerging, things are moving, and even the sense of being that is really the sense of connection. Because even when we try to describe it, you're verbalizing a lot of things that I would point to, like this being is a, potentially a sense of flow. But hang on, I'm not always in flow. So it's something different than that. Like, and then, even the just a simple sense of when I feel connected either to myself or the world around me, my sense of being feels fundamentally different. And it's like it's almost like the deepest stillness of a body of water, rather, because I can still get, even before we joined this call, I was telling you about my frustrations in trying to create something. I don't feel like I've lost touch of a sense of being, but that's just the kind of the frothy, or the froth on the surface. It's not like my whole sense of being has been rocked. I love then this sense of homecoming. Like, what does that, what would that even point to for you?
Yeah, again, if I feel into that, there's a sort of wellspring of, at the same time, grief, um, sadness, but the flip side of that is deep, deep love. And the homecoming is really to, it's and I often talk in this sort of we form, or this for the species, or but it's on all these different skills. It's both how I experience things and how I see maybe the collective experience things, and how I try to interpret this fitting within this larger consciousness, which is this living planet. And so, homecoming, it really feels like our species, the Homo sapiens, we've been on a sort of streak, running away from the rest of the biosphere. And I think this development also has been necessary. I don't think Gaia is making mistakes. I think she just plays games with high stakes. That's maybe the thing. It's a developmental process in which the planet has become in which Gaia has become capable of seeing herself, but also seeing outside of time. So being able to remember the past, but also to project towards the future. And that's something that humans are innately good at. That's really what our, if I have to point to anything for Homo sapiens, is our biological, or it's our development to be able to live outside of time and to live in worlds of abstraction. And if we picture ourselves as being an organ within the body of this larger organism, then she just went through a pretty big growth shoot, or a very rapid development, because our species is incredibly young, and and for the majority of our existence, based on geological record, and I don't know, for the majority of our species existence, we've been hunter gatherers living in small tribes or small-ish groups, which felt mostly embedded within this larger organism, within Gaia. And it's been only like for the last 5% or something of our existence, or less, that we've grown into this swarm organism, this sort of much larger thing. And that was first city states, maybe, and then empires, and empires collapse, and now we are a planetary swarm organism. But we still have the sort of hardware. I don't like these terms necessarily, but we still have this cultural, or this developmental history of being these smaller groups that were normally embedded and part of their surrounding, and really in tune with what makes sense in this biotope that I live in. Different rules count when I live in the savannah than count when I live in the Sahara, or when I live in the northern forests. And we've diversified, being able to live in all these different ways, all these different states of being. And there's home there, because you're connected to exactly the surrounding that you're in. But in this rapid development towards this totally new way of being, this planetary awareness, which we aren't individually that aware of yet, we've lost home. So become completely. This is what I sense, is we've become very much disrupted, and you can point towards colonialism, but I think these things go deeper than that. And I sense that if we're moving towards homecoming, it's reconnecting to the soil, it's reconnecting to this living planet, but doing this on a planetary scale. And finding out that it's different on every place, and at the same time, it's the same everywhere. It's the same being Homo sapiens over in this whole thing, because we become aware that we are both individual, collective Homo sapiens, and collective Gaia. And then I'm curious what will come after that.
The the sense you mentioned earlier of just experiencing loneliness, and then just, I think, how you beautifully captured there the idea of we're missing home, because we've literally kind of created a new structure where we almost seem to can't plug into the surrounding, like it's all changed so rapidly. It sounds like quite a logical extension almost of that loss of home, the way you framed it there. How do you sense that loneliness even within yourself?
Yeah, it manifests with a longing, sense of longing to these deeper ways of connecting, which I only get short bursts from, be it either I'm on holiday and I don't know, I'm hiking, or I'm walking in the local woods, and every now and then it just hits you and that you feel really at home, or indeed with plant medicine ceremony, these kind of things. But often, yeah, it often manifests in this longing for those ways of being and connecting, and often it's connecting to the natural environment, but it's also the wish to connect very deeply to people because we are nature as well, and it also feels like this individualized way of living, and it's different across the globe. Of course, I just want to generalize a bit, otherwise I cannot make any statement. But um, I think that also there's also a deep yearning to really deeply connect to each other, and that there is a memory in our species, and I think I have it somewhere in my bones that I know how deep we can connect, how deep you can really see another person and really feel another person, and then personhood you can. It's of course a human person, yes, but you can also have a non-human person, which you can connect so deeply to. I would liken it to telepathy in a sense that it's such an embodied sense of really feeling how it is to be, be something else and getting the sort of compassion and the empathy from that, and also being seen by someone else that deeply, to be seen for who you really are. That's also the great antidote against loneliness. I think that's the antidote against loneliness. And again, it's, are you able to sense that within yourself? Well, that's the journey, I think.
Isn't this gorgeous though? I think the sentiments that you kind of reiterated a few times around just remembering.
Hmm.
This is almost like what brings me most optimism about where we are, because I think there's something really innate. I don't think it's new skills and more information, anything like this. I think there's just a deep remembering. I find it really interesting that for you specifically, that can happen quite readily in nature. And I think even that's a very telling part of this. Like, you're not going into nature with a top five list or like a sequence of techniques. It's something that occurs quite naturally. What for you? What's pointed you to that sense of this is something that we're potentially just in need of remembering rather than reinventing, or in need of a fix?
Nice. Nice. Excellent question. I immediately get the image of my sort of past journey over the last couple of years, going through burnout and feeling like this deep ecological grief, this deep connection to, initially, I would say, the living planet, the biosphere, but with that is also the human. But I've always, since I was little, been moved most by, the natural world, as in the non-human. That doesn't mean that the human troubles don't hit me also as deep, but it's just, yeah, that's often how I get into that. Um, what I feel most is that the point is remembering. I came from a very heady background, so I've been used to solving problems by thinking and abstraction. Um, and for me, the whole process of becoming more in tune with myself and with the heart, and I would say in tune with the world, has been through feeling instead of thinking. Um, yeah, feeling, sensing instead of trying to build, let's say, mental architecture to make sense of things. Uh, And I often find that tool is very developed for me, but it will get in the way of feeling. And it's useful. It's incredibly useful because if you first experience, you take in a lot of perceptions, a lot of experience, you feel a lot of things, and then you say, okay, now make sense of it, please. Then it can very quickly build a logical structure that fits. But if you start with the logical structure, then it's like, yeah, good luck getting anything new or sensing what is actually present. So that awareness came through for me. That it's really the you could call it the left hemisphere. That's also by Ian McGilchrist's theories on the hemisphere differences. It's the left hemisphere's propensity to build, or it can only build maps. So it represents instead of dealing with what is present. And so I had to remind myself at a certain moment, like, okay, I really enjoy reading. I really enjoy complex theory and things, but it's not the same as experiencing. It is an approximation, and it will never be one on one the same. And I think that pointed me way more towards, learning to, sense better. And then I like to point really towards these what I would call extrasensory perceptions, way more subtle things. Mix that with, breath work or trance stuff or plant medicine, and starting to dreaming more, receiving more, feeling into the world more. Then it becomes clear, like, yeah, it is a case of remembering, because all the information, I truly believe that it's all there, as in this unfolding cosmos, and we are receivers of that. So we're less a bottom up constructor of knowledge, but we're a receiver of knowledge, which is sort of like we carve words into stone. This knowledge is carved into our neural pathways so we can remember it. So it becomes embodied, so it becomes physical. And if you keep remembering yourself, it becomes maybe more detailed, becomes deeper carved into the body. And it's awakening parts of ourselves, of these older ways of being. And I'm also, again, inspired, or if I think about the majority of the time that the human lived in very close relationship to its environment, and environment is already like a weird term, because it's the rest of the body, as in the rest of the planet. So it's all living things. The environment is also living. It's a collection of all these different organisms. So we lived in close proximity to all these other living things, and we know that memory is still in the body. I think we can innately know what it feels like to be deeply connected to our environment. It's like seeing a kid, I don't know, play in mud, or go outdoors for 4 days hiking or something, and you in the rain, in the sun, and you'll already know that it feels completely different than being indoors for the majority of the time. Yeah.
The sense, though, I love this idea of, even if you hear, like, even if you realize something in these circumstances, that it can feel like, on some plane it can feel like new information, and then on another part of your being it can feel like you've been reminded, or you remember something. There's something about, like, profound realizations that seem to prompt, like, this moment of awe, and then, like, realization of that it's already existed. And so I think this is, yeah, that's what you're saying very much resonates with me. And just from your, I know that you've mentioned some of the modalities or tools that you've used, even, or in opening up these senses some more. But just going from, because I've only obviously talked to you once, but just going from the saying things that were very kind of heady, or kind of intellectual or logical, like, what was a kind of a prompting for you? Was it this burnout? Was it like what kind of instigated this movement from one way to another? And not saying that's that binary, but you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah, yeah. No, no, that's good. Um, Also, as you just spoke, I got the sense that at the same, or it's both. So we're both remembering older states of being. It's like an evolving perennialism. I I don't know if that's the right term. I'm not a
Sounds
trained.
absolutely gorgeous, though, doesn't it?
Okay, I'm not a trained philosopher, but that it's um, that these deep, profound truths have been here forever and they will be here forever, but these truths also move. These truths also evolve. So, like, God is not a stable entity, it also lives, it also moves. And so, we are being constantly asked to remember what it was and at the same time participate in what it can be or wants to be. So, it's, yeah, that's just something that came up for me. And the other question, what prompted me? Yeah, back in 2018, I think. Yeah, when I got into burnout, my burnout was mostly characterized by compulsive thought and heavy, heavy doom thinking. So I took a sort of deep dive into climate change, biodiversity collapse, like the whole meta crisis, this whole thing. And I think my brain just turned into this associative network, like a billiards table, where one thought will just hit into the other ones, and then just spiral this doom scenario. So everything would remind me of how this thing is, how it feels like it's going down the drain, and that was a major prompt for me to really get out of here. Like, okay, this is not working. This depression is. It really felt like a coin toss in the morning. Like, will this be an okay day, or will I just be reminded of, I don't know, like the Arctic ice melting, the methane hydrates that are below there, then going to the surface again, and blah 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 blah. Just the constant being in that kind of state. Um, that was, I think, the main thing that prompted me to really, yeah, try to do if figure something out, how to be different in the world. And the pathway through that was to feel, was to grieve. So I was still in bargaining. I was really like looking at bargaining, anger, like I cannot make any sense of this, how it's all going. And I just needed to feel way more.
You know, you said this homecoming is almost like this wellspring of grief and deep love. And when I heard that, I not only did I think it just sounds beautiful, but it I don't know, it moved something in me, or I felt something, even not even just from your own point of view, like, because I think that there's something maybe universal to what you said there, like that could be quite a common experience. And even if not even thinking about the elements of running away from the, you know, you mentioned Homo sapien running away from the biosphere almost, but just even in our own internal stories of life, I think there's a lot of that to it as well. What what do you think prompted those words to come up? And you know, I just love the combination of grief and then love. Like it almost feels
Hmm.
like the grief could be held, or that we can, because there's such deep love, we can afford to look at the grief, but maybe we're not even aware that the deep love exists as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what prompted me is this lived experience of living with grief, living with this. I could call it ecological grief. You could call it planetary grief. I think this grieving is a also a very powerful way of presencing, of becoming really attuned with reality or with the current moment. And there are many different ways why we, I think, block grief or block heavy emotion. Uh, and also because we don't know what's on the other end, on the other side. Um, you can also picture it. I once felt it. We did a grief ritual, or I co-facilitated a grief ritual. It takes place for hours, multiple people, and to grieve for the planet and everything part of the planet. So you are also the planet. So it's a really like this encompassing thing. And afterwards, I really felt like it was a river that takes on this massive flood. So it moves outside of its bounds. It goes into the floodplains. It also deepens because there's this massive amount of water coming through. This grief, torrent of grief, like crying. It's deep, deep pain. But once the water resides and this flow passes, the river is wider and the river is deeper. And so there can be this deeper appreciation of reality. So the grief is I feel that for me personally, but I think I can expand that to other people's experience. I think the grief is really a initiatory process or a means of becoming more human, becoming more alive, becoming more present, becoming more being more here. And it's the planet. I really feel this. It is the planet calling to us, like, "Hey, please start working with me, or please start dancing again. Please join." Only issue is that I think we in the West, um, or I would say the majority of the species, is quite immature, um, and it has a lot of. We have culturally a lot of difficulty dealing with heavy emotion and dealing with death. Um, but as crises will start to, let's say, knock more on our doors, even for the ones who are in an affluent situation, it will become more and more part of life. But it's a call. It's yes, and it's horrible in the sense, like, yes, we are experiencing great loss, material loss, but it's also it is the living planet that's also experiencing massive loss. The extinction rate is humongous for the non-human species, and it has been high, but it's increasing. And so there's this collective pain that is being felt, and now the human is also feeling it more and more.
I think that's the way we can kind of compartmentalize things, or even say stuff like even justify things. For someone could say, well, I'm just doing my job, or like even just in our own personal lives, we've got lots of kind of mechanisms not to look at reality. And if we say these things and then think that the body isn't feeling them, or it's not weighing on us. And I
Yeah,
think that's kind of one of the great delusions we have, that all this is occurring and that we're somehow unaffected. Or
yeah,
when we look for the reasons for why maybe there's more mental health challenges at this point in time, that it's incredible. We look, well, they've got a good job, what's wrong? Like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's kind of, it's amazing how we've trained ourselves at this point to look away. And I, like you, I see these things as a lot of things can be a call to move in another way. Like, even at the start when you were saying how the world, we could almost be turning on our axis in terms of moving in a different direction, and the poles would pull us to and fro for a time until a new home, or homeostasis is formed. I'm not saying this in the most pessimistic outlook for humanity, but just that I think that there's things that we're clawing to or attaching ourselves to that are actually also making us quite miserable. Because,
Yes.
the word you've touched on a number of times is connection to myself, to the biosphere, to realize I'm part of the planet. Connection as an antidote to loneliness, connection as an antidote to the sense or the lack of feeling, or whether that's connection to grief or a sense of being.
Mm.
And I think that's the kind of incredible thing. It's not that we have to endure crazy hardship when we let go of some of the things we're attached to. I think the sad part is that's what could actually liberate us into feeling alive. I often think when we talk about the remedies for things, it's always what we might have to give up, but the stuff that I think we have to give up would realize when we connect to this other, whether even if it is a sense of being, or as you said, seeing each other. Like, fucking hell, if we could all just be seen and see each other, I guarantee you we wouldn't be pursuing half the things that we think we need to pursue in order to feel like we're either home or to feel at home in this world, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, very, very well said, Mark. I fully agree.
I'm really intrigued for you then, just how, you mentioned 2018 and these observations occurring, then these movements for you occurring. How how are you finding it to walk this path? Like, how are you finding even like homeostasis even within your own life within this shift? Because for me that's a hell of a ride, right? Like
Yeah,
that's it's not just simply new information, new input, therefore new behaviors. I
no,
think this is one of the things that I find most intriguing, even from my own experience of having stepped in new directions or letting go of consistent previous patterns. Like
yeah,
that's a whole ecosystem in itself of movement and madness at times.
yeah, yeah. So I would say I haven't acquired equilibrium or homeostasis. It's
Yeah.
still, I wouldn't call it a free fall anymore, but well, maybe it's mountaineering with a good drop every now and then, but also good heights to
Yeah.
see. So
Yeah.
it's traversing it's humbling. Yeah, the more and more I am on this path and also trying to make it work, as in actual work, trying
Yeah.
to make it work, getting, let's say, enough income to pay for rent and food and all these kind of things. Yeah, that's difficult. That's hard. But I'm figuring out more and more that it's really about my internal conditioning, ways of being. How did I grow up? What are my preconceived notions about myself, about the world? How much trauma is there? In how much coping is there? What are the ways that I keep finding ways that I actually want to die, in the sense of I really want to let go of, and these are parts of me that should be used as compost instead of the general way of being. Um, and it's hard to let go of those, and they will act as a sort of, it's almost like, why are you hitting yourself like constantly? It's like, why are you doing this? And the frustration will mount and build, and like, why is it not working? I want to do this and it's not working. So yeah, it's a process of becoming oneself, as maybe cliche as that sounds. um, and it's not easy. It's super frustrating, because most likely all the things that uh, yeah, all the things that are keeping you in the old conditioning are still there for a reason, because you built them up initially for a good reason. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a process of unfolding, but also unlearning and remembering potentially who you were, like the inner child, all these kind of things like that. What are the things that really give you joy in this world? That's a question that I find quite difficult to answer, and that again saddens me. Like, sometimes I really have to think, like, I don't know. And then, well, start from that process, like start figuring out, hey, how do you have an actual enjoyable day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be- And I think this is a really important thing for people to realize as well, though. Like that, I'm not going to say that just your process is my process, but that sounds very similar. And it is amazing to think that we could have carte blanche to do what we want with a day and still, find if something either lacking or a frustration in engaging with joy, or even, when you mentioned earlier the world is inviting us to dance again. And I think there's something really beautiful to that. That it's not, as I've interviewed all these people, so many people that have stepped away and gone on to, in some cases, gone on to do the things that society would consider them to be very successful for. Um, and yet there is almost periods in these transitions that they refer to where this is like a hell of a process. Like I'm irritated with how it's presented a lot of times, because I think it's presented disingenuously a lot of the times, or people say it lasted a couple of months and now they're reborn and everything is in flow again. Like I'm highly skeptical to that. And I'm not saying that it has to be this elongated process,
No.
but I really do think that there is what you've just described. There is almost the way within this, and it is almost a little bit, generalizing again to maybe the West or whatever. It is a bit sad that we have to figure out what brings us joy rather than hedonistic pursuits, shall we say?
Yeah.
Like, and but there's also something, once again, that gives me immense optimism that if we were more connected to our own natural sense of joy, perhaps we would be more in alignment with, people in our lives, the world around us. So I think this curiosity, or this process of discovery, is just what's required for us as well.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I can echo that. And it's a, so there are parts that are joyful in remembering oneself or becoming aware, like, this is what I used to enjoy, or letting go of heavy weight, of things that you've been carrying for so long. And so there can be joy in that. But often before, it's hard work, or I would say in my case, it's often I really have to go through some deep, through some deep places to really confront things and let go of things. Uh, and again, I find that I think I'm not done. I think I will be doing this for the rest of my life. But the
Yeah.
more I do that, the more I become aware of, like, okay, this is the process, this is the protocol. But it's always different. It's like doing a nature expedition, or I don't know, going again, mountains. I like mountains. I hardly, well, I'm living in the Netherlands, so I don't go to mountains as often as I would like. But picture that you're mountaineering, and then you might be very good at climbing a mountain, but the weather will be different every time, and there might be different animals on the mountain, and the conditions, you might be bring other people, so it will be different. But there's a similar theme in it, so you know that there's this yeah, this sort of path to walk, to go down into the underworld and confront whatever stuff you've sort of pushed away, like, no, I don't, this is not part of me, sort of calling that back. That's also, again, homecoming, I think.
There's one thing I wanted to actually ask you. The first time we spoke, which I forgot to, I read a post of yours before around how you're less inclined to um, meditate on a maybe fixed schedule or diligently, whatever way you want to describe that. And you mentioned just more a sense of being that you were engaging with, once again enhanced by, perhaps your environment if you're in nature. Can you talk to me? Because the way you described it at the time, I thought was I don't know. I thought it was really insightful. Can you just briefly allude to just what that transition for you is, or what you noticed occurring for you that
Yeah,
led to such a kind of led to a movement there?
yeah. Um, Jiddu Krishnamurti comes to mind. So someone who I've enjoyed reading, and I really like his style and work, and also how he's quite, well, what's the word, recalcitrant, or I would say rude, and I like that. It's nice. Um, he had quite an opinion on meditation, and I spent some time meditating. So in my whole process of sort of through burnout, I started meditating daily and tried to build up a practice, and it had really helped. It really helped to center, calm, dissociate from thought, or not feel so identified with thought. So super useful tools, yes. What I started sensing and why it became more and more difficult for me to just sit down and meditate, like I don't know, like only feeling the breath or focusing on, I don't know, bodily sensations. It started to feel way more like work. And again, something that I sort of put on my shoulder, like, here's another task that you have to do. So you feel normal, or you feel that you can function. And then self care becomes this again, it's the same, how you say, slave master, the one who's carrying the whip that you're trying to escape from. It's the same guy, but then he will say, like, yeah, now we're going to meditate and I'm going to talk softly to you, and oh yeah, now it's going real great. And I felt like I was just getting very tired of my whole life feeling as a one big checklist. That's like, okay, this you have to do, this, yeah. And then where's the joy, or where do I rest apart from sleeping? And then I wrote that post. There was also the beginning of that week. I just felt called to go to the woods. The local woods have been a major part in my healing, I would say, out of burnout, these kind of things. I spent a lot of time wandering by myself in the woods. Um, yeah, so I found myself that week multiple times just putting a blanket in my backpack and cycling to the woods and just walking. And then this spot feels nice, put the blanket down and just lay down, either flat on my stomach or on my back on the side, and then just, yeah, see what comes up. Either I sleep, so I also slept for like an hour like that. Yeah. Nice, probably that was what I needed. Or I was just listening to the trees or the birds that come by, or small insects, or, and then just allowing that to happen. Like, okay, not go into the 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 slave driver who's saying, like, you have to this amount of time, and now you should make it a schedule. Here's the top 10 lists of blah 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 blah. I'm just so tired and skeptical of all the talk about productivity and all this shit. Yeah,
Because I just think that there's once, and I follow a similar trajectory to you. I think in taking meditation quite seriously for a time, and I still may meditate now. It'll be quite a lot more sporadic, but I'm far more interested in paying attention to life itself, or whatever the totality of my experience is, even rather than a singular focus of even breath. And I'm absolutely not knocking meditation, if you know what I mean.
no,
But
no,
I think it's the I really do think it's the intention. If it does fulfill something on a checklist, that's where it was going for me, and I think that's where we may be erring a little bit in terms of, as you say, this kind of package of self care. Simon, just over the course of this conversation, from opening up even with this question, perhaps that you're trying to, or even exploring rather than seeking a final answer to, but how to be, the distinction of time between worlds, looking to experience this sense that's more adaptive rather than there being a finality to it, like a connection, a groundedness, a presence. connection to the environment, acknowledging that the way the world is now, we're all in some ways potentially seeking a home. And you even mentioned just from how our the shift has gone from hunter gatherer to larger communities to cities to nations to planetary concerns, and just how that this kind of rapid adjustment or shift in the last number of centuries even just has left us with this kind of sense of lacking a home, potential loneliness within that. What could be even a sense of home for you would require some sort of feeling of, feeling this wellspring of what could initially be grief, but then realizing on the other side of that grief, there could be love, that there can be this reconnection, this remembering that life could be calling us to dance with it once more. And even just both of our kind of reflections on the idea of, just even the exploration of sensing joy in our lives once more, and how that can even be a process in letting go as well. Just really, really intrigued to hear your perspective on the question of what is a good life for you, Simon.
What comes up for me immediately is rest. That there's a lot of rest in it. I so I have two cats at home, and I've always been fascinated by big cats when I was little, and you see that the majority of the time they rest, so they just are. Probably they're not lying down, and they're often also awake, but they're just being, and they're not then worried. Most likely, I cannot peer into their head, but I don't see them as being very worried about what does it mean to be a cat, and should I not be somewhere else doing productive things and all this blah blah. I think the majority of what is causing planetary problems and personal problems is this overproduction, because production already includes the consumption of something else. So it's the consumption of natural resources, it's the consumption of attention, it's the consumption of life force to produce. But what the hell are we producing that's valuable? And I think a good life will look like that we have a profound shift in let's talk for myself. I have a profound shift in what I find valuable, and I align myself to that. And then I can drop off this need to be productive, or this need to be someone that I'm not, or this need to be something else than I am currently. And I think that's a good life. That is really like, I'm just glad to be here. That's it.
I think that's absolutely magic, to be honest, and it's so bloody simple. Between the image of you just putting down a blanket in the forest and, yeah, maybe paying attention, but maybe sleeping because that's required. Before we got on this call here, I did an afternoon sleep with my little baby, which is a practice not a practice, but it's just been something that's been occurring. And very few things bring me much more, much more joy or shift my perspective for the rest of the day than having a rest when it's required. And as you say, I think it is such an antidote to the overproduction or attachment to productivity. So I almost have this thought in my head of even this conversation of kind of resting into being, and I think that's fundamentally important. So look, Simon, I've enjoyed this conversation with you immensely. I'm extremely grateful for you joining us here on the What is a Good Life podcast, and I really look forward to staying in touch with you as well.
It's been great, Mark. Thank you for all the nice words and your excellent skills of sort of bringing it back together. Yeah, I've also enjoyed this conversation. Conversation is a place where I feel a lot of joy, and so too in this one. Thanks.